Well, that's, ladies and gentlemen, the electors are unbelievably being besieged by people who want to destroy the election. It is unreal. You remember the criticism that came on Trump because he said, well, I'm not sure I'm going to go along with the election. I want to see what happens. Oh, baby, they don't want to see. I mean, they've got the votes in. They've challenged. The challenge in Wisconsin didn't go anywhere. Now they're saying the Russians hacked it, but the Russians did not talk about Hillary Clinton not going to Wisconsin. You know, you can say, well, Putin called Hillary and told her not to go to Wisconsin. And no, she didn't go to Wisconsin on her own, didn't campaign very much in the other Rust Belt states, and she lost. Fair and square, but they're trying to steal the election. It's unbelievable. Well, the electors vote today, and I think the results will come out as we expect. We hope so. But Donald Trump is giving promising signals that he plans to target the spending crisis in Washington. At the same time, of course, those on the left, the Washington Post, the New York Times, and the chattering multitudes in the so-called mainstream media, they want to do everything they can to undermine Mr. Trump before he even gets started.
And as Pat mentioned, liberals have also been claiming that he didn't really win, arguing that Russia hacked the election. And Dale Hurd has the story.
Left-wing activists are hoping protests and threats can prevent a Donald Trump victory in the Electoral College vote, as the Democrats and the media have worked to chip away at the legitimacy of Trump's victory, with stories about Russian hacking. The incoming White House chief of staff calls it a spin job.
I think the real question is why the Democrats and why these electors and why MoveOn.org and all of these organizations are doing everything they can to delegitimize the outcome of the election.
FBI Director James Comey and Director of National Intelligence James Clapper are reported to agree with a CIA assessment that Russia tried to help Donald Trump win the White House, but there's no proof that it actually helped Trump win. The source of the hacked Democratic emails, Julian Assange, insists they did not come from Moscow. The Washington Times reports the source was a, quote, disgusted Democratic whistleblower. And Russia wasn't the only international flap over the weekend. Not even president yet, Trump was handed a bit of foreign policy drama when China seized a U.S. underwater drone. China has said it would give it back, but Trump tweeted, "We should tell China we don't want the drone they stole back. Let them keep it." All this comes as the president-elect is giving new signs that he's planning a conservative domestic agenda. Trump saying Saturday he would nominate South Carolina Republican Congressman Mick Mulvaney as budget director. Mulvaney has been called an anti-establishment radical on Capitol Hill. He's a strong fiscal conservative who has pushed for big cuts in government spending. Meanwhile, at Donald Trump's final public rally before the Electoral College vote, the Reverend Franklin Graham asked God to heal the divide that we have in this country. Graham said he believes Trump's victory is an answer to the prayers of hundreds of thousands of Americans. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Well, with us now from Washington is our CBN News political correspondent, David Brody. David, WikiLeaks says they got their DNC information from a leak, not Russian hackers. What do you know about all that?
Well, yeah, that's right. Julian Assange is saying that as it relates to WikiLeaks. Look, Pat, when it comes to the Democrats here, you kind of touched on it at the beginning of the show. I mean, if you have a picture of the word sour grapes, right underneath will be all the Democrats. I mean, really, this is really what it's come to. I mean, if you think about what the Democrats have done after this election and even before the election, where they were already peddling the Russia theme. They're blaming Russia. They're blaming Trump. They're blaming white nationalists for Trump's victory. The only people they're not blaming are Hillary Clinton and themselves. And I think that's been a big part of the problem. And quite frankly, for the Democrats, if they're going to move forward from this, they're going to have to learn internal lessons. You mentioned Wisconsin. I don't think there's any question about the fact that there were plenty of missteps along the way. And Russia might be the least of the problems for the Democrats.
It seems like they're fighting among themselves, though, because Bernie Sanders apparently won a lot of the hearts and minds of the rank and file. And the leaks show that Hillary and her gang were doing everything they can to delegitimize Bernie, not just Trump.
Well, that's right. And this is part of the problem for the Democrats going forward. You know, you've got the Bernie wing, Elizabeth Warren is part of that wing. You've got the Hillary wing that's kind of been put out to pasture, if you will, for a while, or at least she's somewhere in the woods in Chappaqua looking for something along the lines of that Appalachian Trail there. But look, the bottom line is that you've got Democrats in disarray, and so they've got to go ahead and delegitimize Donald Trump's victory, because they're looking eventually here to the future to make sure those 100 days are the worst 100 days for Donald Trump that could ever possibly happen. And, you know, it's going to be tough because there is a mandate here. And I know they're going to go to the popular vote and the fact that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. But the reality is, when you win 306 electoral votes, and I know the Democrats and the media don't want to call it a landslide, but when you were predicted to win about 212 electoral votes and you come away with 306, that's a pretty decent victory.
Well, Trump now has picked Congressman Mick Mulvaney as budget director. Tell us about him. I'm not familiar with him at all.
Well, Pat, this is a fascinating pick. You know, the OMB position, as you know, very, very important in Washington. He is going to make the trains run on the budget. And so what you have here is a guy from the Freedom Caucus. Let's just say what the Freedom Caucus is. It's a bunch of Tea Party conservative members. He voted against the debt ceiling. This is a guy that wanted Boehner out. So he's very, very conservative. And so I think what you have here is, in a guy like Mulvaney, is Trump wanted him to protect him on the right side of the party. In other words, Trump's going to call for some big infrastructure spending, highways, bridges, roads. We've heard about it before. He's going to need Mulvaney to sell the Freedom Caucus, the Tea Party, this agenda going forward, and figure out from a calculator standpoint how to make the infrastructure spending work while at the same time getting that budget under control. Mulvaney's pretty good at that. He's a guy that has Harvard experience, economics professor. He knows his numbers.
You know, during the campaign, there was almost no talk about entitlements, no talk about Social Security, no talk about the retirement problem. That's looming, and do you think Trump's ever going to deal with that? He's got to.
Yeah, I think, you know, Pat, I think what we're seeing with Donald Trump is what a shock that it's kind of a morphing at times in terms of not different positions, but different ways to come out of positions. So entitlements, for example, you know, on the campaign trail, he said he didn't want to touch entitlements. And now we're getting a sense that, well, you know what, maybe there are certain ways that entitlements have to be adjusted or changed or fixed. Paul Ryan has mentioned that. Donald Trump is starting to mention a little bit more of that on the campaign trail. And Mick Mulvaney is a big proponent of entitlement change. So think about the power nucleus in Washington. You've got Reince Priebus, who wants entitlement reform. You've got Mike Pence, who wants entitlement reform. Paul Ryan and Mick Mulvaney, all of them pushing this. And Donald Trump, remember, we heard about that 35% tariff that he wanted to levy on companies that were going to leave the United States. Well, now, if you notice, he doesn't say 35% anymore. He says, we're going to have to do something. We're going to have to impose tariffs. But, you know, maybe tax reform will do the trick. You see, this is the Paul Ryan influence. This is the Mike Pence influence, because he realizes that tax reform may be the better way to go. Same thing with entitlement reform.
Last question. Any other big appointments in the horizon that you see?
Well, two last appointments that he has to make. You know, there is the Veteran Affairs, and of course, Scott Brown looks like to be the leading contender there, moderate Republican in the past, at least. And then, of course, the Secretary of Agriculture, Heidi Heitkamp, a Democrat. And on the campaign trail, Donald Trump said he wasn't planning to put any Democrats in his cabinet. Well, Heidi Heitkamp might be the one to actually get the nod. We'll see if that actually comes to fruition. But other than that, we're going to look for a lot of senior aides in terms of what he's going to do there, especially as it relates to press secretary. Very interesting to see what he does there. Sean Spicer, the leading contender for press secretary. But there's Kimberly Guilfoyle. I can't pronounce that name, but, you know, she's on Fox News. Those are the two. Yeah, those are the two, I think, Pat.
Well, I wonder, are they going to take off for Christmas? It looks like Trump ought to be yearning to get to Mar-a-Lago as fast as he can. Are they going to cool it for a few days?
He probably will take a few days off, but, you know, Trump's idea of vacation is work. So, you know, it's always work with Trump. By the way, he will be having meetings today as well, but it won't be at Trump Tower in New York. It'll be down at Mar-a-Lago down in Florida. So already I think he's prepping for a little R&R.
Well, he should have it. David, thank you. Keep it up, buddy. God bless you.
Thanks, Pat.
Well, many Hillary Clinton supporters believe she should be president since she won the so-called popular vote. They want to dump the Electoral College system that gave Donald Trump the presidency. They call it undemocratic and outdated. But as Paul Strand reports, there's a genius in the Electoral College idea that ensures that every American has a voice.
After winning a war for their independence, colonists weren't about to surrender their newly won power and freedom.
But one has to remember, when America was being formed, it was basically 13 sovereign entities coming together to form a nation, and each one of those entities had to be respected.
Those cursing the creators of the Electoral College should remember the tough sales job the founders had.
They forget that they had to get agreement of all the states in order to form this union, and part of that agreement was how we came up with a system to elect people.
Political commentator Rich Kelsey says this system makes a presidential candidate have to win the states, not just individual voters. That ensures less populated states have a voice.
The Electoral College was one of the ways they came up with to make sure that small states had the same type of say in who you picked as a national leader.
Elections expert Hans von Spakovsky.
If you go back to the framers, they wanted an electoral college because they wanted to create a balance between the heavily populated and less populated areas of the country. And they were afraid that if the president's elected by national popular vote, the candidates will only go to the big cities. They would ignore the rural areas, you know, the places that folks in New York call flyover country.
And then you have to worry about, well, is the president making national policy based only upon what the people of California want, what the people of Florida want, right? How about the folks up in Alaska? How about the folks in Montana?
So are Democrats like Senator Barbara Boxer trying to kill the Electoral College just because they think it's undemocratic?
Let's not pretend that this is some great effort to increase democracy. This is an effort to win elections. And right now, today, the progressives believe scrapping the Electoral College is the best way for their movement to win more elections.
They want a president who will be elected by the big urban centers that they control and where they have the most voters. You know, New York City, Los Angeles, places like that, so that they don't have to listen to what the rest of normal America says.
And if opponents really believe the Electoral College is undemocratic, does the U.S. Senate have to go too? Because the House of Representatives is a truly democratic institution, but each state, no matter how big or small, gets the same amount of senators.
40 million people in California get 2 senators. 580,000 people in Montana get 2 senators. The system was designed to give equal weight to the states.
Both Kelsey and von Spakovsky say this particular presidential election shows the fairness of institutions like the Electoral College. Kelsey points out with just a popular vote, Trump could have won 49 states and still have lost.
But the state of California, he loses by 4 million votes and therefore isn't president.
And von Spakovsky says Clinton's support was mostly restricted to big cities in just a few states.
The whole rest of the country voted for Trump. In fact, I think you could drive from the East Coast to the West Coast and from the northern border to the southern border and never go through a county that voted for Hillary Clinton.
And so that's why several hundred electors are picking the president on December 19th, and not we the people back on November 8th. Paul Strand, CBN News, reporting from Capitol Hill.
Thanks, Paul. We ought to also point out that Trump didn't even campaign in California. There was no effort whatsoever to win California because California wasn't part of the calculus. He didn't need it to get the Electoral College, and so he didn't campaign. So the fact that she rolled up a huge majority in California does not necessarily mean that much. If it had been a hard-fought battle, you had these so-called battleground states. There was a tremendous fight for North Carolina, tremendous fight for Pennsylvania. These other states, there were so-called battleground states that would decide the election. But when the calculus was all over, there were so many that were figured in the hard old South that were going to go Republican regardless. There was going to be New York and California, but you went to California, you went to Oregon, you went to Washington, figured that was going to go solid Democrat. So where are you going to get your balance? That's why they were called battleground. There were certain states like Ohio and North Carolina that were in the mix. And so that's where the attention came, because that decided, you knew these were solid Democrat, these were solid Republican. But without the Electoral College, we would be governed by California and all the radical things that go on there. Wonderful people live in California, granted, but it is an extraordinarily left-leaning state. And that would be the model for the country, because they have so many people that they would dominate the election. So we need the Electoral College. The founders are pretty smart, Terry.
You know, it's just so hard to understand how this keeps going on and on and on the liberal side. It's such bad form. Do you think she had the media on every level in her back pocket? Do you think they believed their own stories and then were so disappointed they couldn't believe it was real?
They write the spin. I mean, it's their deal. But the Democrats sit behind closed doors and say, well, how are we going to defeat this guy? Well, what we're going to do is stop him at every turn, every time along the way. And what he's going to have to do is just jam things through. The one thing that's dangerous is the siren song, please, Mr. Trump, let's be reasonable. Let's sit down and talk. That's the killer.